Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 7th of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather, first of all, bright, pretty cold for most people, sunshine. So it's looking good across most of the country, and reports are much of the same in Scotland. Although some sympathy to those who are in Norfolk, because I understand they got most of the nation's rain over the weekend. So there we are. Bonfire night went well for most people, and certainly we had an excellent display in very clear, cold weather in Plymouth. So the rockets and explosions were spectacular. So thank you for the organisers of that. And I just hope that nobody had any naughty thoughts about Guy Fawkes and blowing up Parliament, because of course in Theresa May's Conservative Britain in 2016, such thoughts would be a terrorist thought crime, Mike.
Yes.
So good bonfire, but keep the thought crime down.
Yes. Well, speaking of thought crime, Telegraph, get straight into it here. Theresa May will call a general election if Brexit stalls. Jeremy Hunt hints. He didn't really hint anything of the kind. This is just more propaganda, more suggestions that something can take place which can't. Well, they're saying Theresa May will call a general election if MPs and votes vote down legislation to trigger Brexit, Jeremy Hunt suggested, as he became the first cabinet minister to discuss openly the prospect of an early poll. What did he have to say? Actually, he said that any attempts to frustrate the Brexit plans would result in an early election. Didn't say how that would happen, but what he did say was a general election is frankly the last thing the government wants. Theresa May wants to get on with the job, and I think because of that it's highly unlikely Parliament would not, in the end, back a decision to trigger Article 50. So, well, we'll see. In the meantime, the Tory party on the Conservative Home website recognised the reality of the situation. It's time to repeal the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, they say. The author here saying, yesterday I wrote about the many-fronted war being waged against the royal prerogative. The prompt for that piece was the High Court's Article 50 judgment, but the ramifications are much broader. One of the many issues posed by the reluctance of many to defend and bolster superficially monarchical powers is the difficulties posed in repealing the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. Yet current events show why it needs to go. They go on to complain about the fact that this act exists. Well, this, as just a quick reminder, was one of the acts of constitutional vandalism done by the original government of what's his name? I've forgotten him already. He's only gone a few weeks. David Cameron. Sorry, I hate to remember that name. But anyway, that was one of the first pieces of constitutional vandalism by his government. What it means, of course, is that parliaments are of a fixed term. They can't be repealed, or they can't be dissolved by the Queen. Therefore, you've just got to lump it, unless you're prepared to vote a no-confidence vote against yourself as the Prime Minister, or you can persuade two-thirds of MPs to vote for dissolution of Parliament, which, bearing in mind at the moment, most MPs support Remain. It's pretty unlikely that would happen.
That's true. This is actually called big dog politics, as we'll see in a minute when we have a look at some of the comments by the BBC. Just wanted to say, Mike, that Conservative Home website there, of course, was the very website that covered details of the fact that the Conservatives under David Cameron were going to implement Saul Alinsky policy, a man who says it doesn't matter what you do as long as you get the political agenda through, same man who dedicated his book Rules for Radicals to Lucifer. All of that information mysteriously disappeared from Conservative Home website. What a good job we kept a screenshot of that.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, let's just remind ourselves of Friday's headlines, Friday's front pages, and the Daily Mail is really what I want to focus on here, targeting the judges as enemies of the people. Well, The Guardian had some comment on this today, and because of further coverage by the Mail, The Guardian criticising a headline, May backs press in judges' row. They're asking, does the Daily Mail want us to vote for judges? Would it prefer Britain to adopt a system of certain states in the US where judges are chosen by the electorate. This is a logical conclusion from the persistent assault on the judiciary in its intemperate Enemies and the People front page on Friday. The opening sentence stated MPs last night tore into an unelected panel of out-of-touch judges for ruling that embittered Remain supporters in Parliament should be allowed to frustrate the overwhelming verdict of the British people. This article really has some reasonable criticisms of the Mail, but the key point is here, of course, the Mail wasn't really calling for elected judges, but it highlights the point that we've been making, Brian, that of course judges, we don't actually know how they're appointed. The appointments panel appoints them. We don't know who appoints the appointments panel, and we don't really know how they're selected, how they're chosen. Really, a bit of transparency on that mechanism would be appropriate under these circumstances.
Very appropriate, and I've got to say that as we dig into the role and responsibilities of Elizabeth Truss as Lord Chancellor, it becomes even more murky because, of course, she's not legally trained, lawfully trained. So she's doing a job. She's supposedly guarding the Constitution, but she's untrained. We don't know who appoints the judges. So what we've got is Britain descending into this secretive, closed-door Chatham House country where we don't even know who's actually ruling us at the moment. We've got more to come on this.
But at the weekend then, Nigel Farage, absolutely everywhere, saying that there could be riots on the streets if Brexit is blocked. What else did he have to say? He said that Gina Miller, who's the person that brought the High Court case in the first place, was stirring up the biggest political upset the UK has ever seen. And he was suggesting there would be chaos if the people's vote is not honoured. But then he went on to say that perhaps 100,000 strong march outside the Supreme Court on the day that we head over to have the appeal for the High Court judgment. Surely this is, under the circumstances, not the most sensible suggestion.
Well, I think it's a very dangerous suggestion, Mike, and we're back on the subject of Nigel Farage, and I know there's one or two of our UK column supporters who get very hot under the collar the moment we mention this man. But if we think about what he's done, he has consistently pointed at the European Union. The danger is the European Union. Well, dangerous, that's absolutely true. But when many other people have been saying, well, no, let's have a look at the criminality within the British government itself. Let's have a look at treason in Westminster. Let's have a look at what the banks are doing. Let's have a look at child abuse in Westminster. This man does not want to get engaged. He then says he's got to leave politics because apparently he was threatened or his family were threatened. So you would think that he might go quiet for a bit, but no, he turns up in America supporting Trump. And now he's back, not helping to expose what is really going on in the City of London and Westminster. No, let's see whether we can ramp up some violence. Because, of course, what does the British state want at the moment? It wants violence to break the country apart, and it wants to be able to use all of our recently paramilitarized police. So either Nigel Farage has gone a little bit soft, he doesn't really know what he's doing, or else he's now starting to peddle a very, very dangerous agenda, which is actually helping the government.
Right, we're going to move on to Syria and Bashar al-Assad, because he's been interviewed in the Times over the weekend. But just before I do that, I want to mention that Vanessa Beeley is with us at the moment and will be speaking in the Wheatsheaf pub in Frome on Wednesday evening. Now, she was speaking in Bristol on Friday evening. Excellent audience there, about 90 people or so. But there was a little bit of trouble outside from some anti-Assad, one or two anti-Assad protesters. And it sounds like one or two of these people will be turning up on Wednesday as well. But anyway, that aside, as many people as possible to go and support Vanessa would be very good. So that's 7:30 p.m. In Frome at the Wheatsheaf pub.
Excellent.
So anyway, Bashar al-Assad speaking to the Sunday Times, and fascinating interview. Unfortunately, it's subscription, so you've got to pay them to see it. But nonetheless, he was describing the situation in Syria. He says, we call it a world war, but it's a world war against Syria. Tens of countries against us, sending those terrorists money and logistics, whereas our army is only Syrian, and so we struggled. He said that if you ask him what the topics would be for a political solution, he doesn't know. No one has really proposed anything sensible. But he said that the core of the problem is about the outside countries interfering in Syrian affairs. If they stop, then the terrorists will be weak and leave or be defeated, and then we can sit as Syrians and talk about solutions. He said what's made the difference in recent months, because obviously the Syrians doing a lot better, and that was firepower. They have firepower that we don't have, so the Russian intervention was useful. He said they got some support from Hezbollah, but Lebanon is a country of only 4 million people, so that support was small. They got some from the Iranians, but they didn't send any troops. They sent offers to help, and in the end, it came to Russian firepower that has made the real difference. And he said the Syrian people make the decisions. The Russian military has been in Syria for 6 decades. Their policy rests on 2 things: morals and international law. Even if they have a point of view, they say, this is your country, you know more. They never try to interfere because they don't want anything from us. They don't ask us to be a puppet president. And he went on to say they know if Syria loses the war against terrorism, the terrorism will prevail in Europe, and that affects Russia and everyone in the world. So that was an interesting statement. Interview. But Vanessa mentioned this comment that he made on another interview quite recently, because of course I think this is maybe the first time I've seen him comment directly on the white helmets. But he was talking about, if you know, Omran, which is the little boy that the very famous photograph, and his sister. He said both Omran and his sister were rescued by what they call in the West the white helmets, which is a facelift of al-Nusra in Aleppo. So another interesting comment. So, Assad is just increasingly comes across as being a reasonable, rational person. And Theresa May and Boris Johnson, well, the less said, the better. Perhaps.
Well, we're going to have a little look at that, Mike. Let's have a look at what our politicians have actually said. So we've got the BBC here, 8th of August 2016. They were claiming an expose that they'd been able to take photographs of UK special forces pictured on the ground in Syria. And we'd like to remind people on the 29th of November 2015, David Cameron lied. He said there will be no British troops on the ground in Syria. And this is what we're dealing with, utter lies from British politicians. They lie time and time again. But of course, we're now seeing them not just lie about British economic policy, for instance. We're now lying in order to destroy nation states and achieve regime change. So we're moving into dangerous ground in UK, and I'm going to emphasise the point: we have yet to hear Mr. Nigel Farage speak on these sorts of matters, never mentions them. This is where the real danger is, treason at the heart of Westminster. And let's take a look at the BBC's role. So this is going back a little bit to, where are we, March 2016. It says, reality check, did the UK lose its sovereignty in 1972? And revisiting this article, we can see the great lie about Parliament being sovereign. And this is the description. This is what I mentioned, the big dog. Parliament is the big dog. It can lumber around the Constitution, passing any law it likes. None of the smaller dogs can challenge the big fella. You with it so far, Mike?
It's quality, Brian.
Parliament is the supreme legal authority in the UK which can create or end any law. And it goes on to say that the courts cannot overrule its legislation, and parliamentary sovereignty is the most important part of the UK Constitution. So this is lie, deceit, propaganda on the British public, almost like we've never seen before. But of course, it's coming into public view now because of circumstances that we're seeing happen around us on a daily basis.
Are you going to mention juries? Just before
please do.
Well, just before you move on from that slide, the courts cannot overrule its legislation. The courts can't overrule its legislation. Juries can. So this is annulment by jury. Is absolutely within the remit and the power of the jury to overrule, and in fact it's the jury's duty to overrule bad legislation when it's appropriate.
Yeah, and we're going to be mentioning this, of course, a bit more towards the BCG constitution. But if we have a look at the article, here's the gentleman. It's Clive Coleman. So we thought, well, let's have a look and see who's written this. He's the legal correspondent for the BBC News. I believe this is the gentleman here, so it gives a little bit about his background. He charges between £3,000 and £5,000 to do talks. Talking circuit is always good. We said, why doesn't BBC's legal expert understand the Constitution? Well, if we look at his trained areas of law, it's advocacy, contract, civil litigation, evidence and negotiation. But he's also, he writes comedy, Spitting Image, Alias, Smith & Jones, Heartbeat, Crossroads. So I don't know whether he's drifted across the border, Mike. He's not sure whether he's writing comedy when in fact he should be commenting on the Constitution. But we'll leave other people to judge that. So let's bring in another British politician we can trust. And
another comedian?
Well, I'd say so, another comedian. This is Boris Johnson in his Mayor of London former role. And we'd just like to remind people, he said this: you cannot express the sovereignty of Parliament and accept the 1972 European Communities Act. So there he is, spinning the great lie of the sovereignty of Parliament. And all of these politicians are in it. They all know what the game is, and the game is to dismantle Britain. Now, this is where we start to see how dangerous this is. This is part of an article from the Mail today. And what is it about? SAS troops in Iraq have been given a kill or capture list of up to 200 British terrorists amid fears they could return home and carry out a massacre. So a kill list has been drawn up containing the names of hundreds of very bad people.
Yes.
I think there's a few government people think I'm a very bad person. I don't know whether I'm now going to be on a kill list. We'll see. And this is a kill or capture mission, and it has begun. If people get captured, they're going to be handed over to Iraqi authorities. I think we know what will happen there. So this is the key question. With no debate in Parliament, who now decides who is to be murdered?
Right. So they're saying that these people are ISIS terrorists, but as soon as you start killing people outside the judicial system, you're just as bad as the terrorists.
Well, I think worse, because at least the terrorists are sort of self-declared, but we've got politicians in suits who are trying to say that they're nice people. So who has made this decision? Well, is it Theresa May as Prime Minister? Is it perhaps Michael Fallon as Secretary of State for Defence? Elizabeth Truss, Lord Chancellor, she's supposed to be good on legal matters. Boris Johnson, is he the person who decides you're going to be killed? Or is it perhaps into MI6 and Special Intelligence Services? However, British government now saying we're going to kill you because we don't like you. We don't need any form of proper judicial process, constitutional process. We've just got a kill list. This is pretty dangerous stuff. Yeah. In fact, it's very dangerous stuff. So what can we do? Well, let's have a look at a dictatorship. If it looks like a dictatorship, walks like a dictatorship, and speaks, it probably is. And this is part of information we pushed out several years ago, but it still applies. The banks, we've got to start with the banks because, of course, the banks have driven the EU superstate. They've also driven common purpose. And if you're going to run a dictatorship, you need to control the media. So this is why we've got the thrust against British media via Hacked Off, Full Fact, Leveson, which you reported the update on a few days ago, Mike. And of course, we got men like Kenneth Clarke after secret courts. Here's the Saul Alinsky policy, which mysteriously disappeared off Conservative Home website. And where does that lead? Theresa May, Home Secretary as she was, building a huge state police and spying empire. Fixated Threat Assessment Centre, you can be picked up with the state if they think you are getting too fixated on Theresa May. And GCHQ, 1.9 billion to spy on the British public. And this is where we've now got. So we've got a parliament that claims sovereignty. It says we can decide if we're going to kill you. We don't need to bring you in court. It's got the multi-agency public protection arrangements, spying on the public. You can die in police custody. You can be sectioned for criticising the state. And they're going to control the media and steal your children. This is not accidental. This is real. And it's Theresa May and Cameron's British Empire in 2016. What can we do? Well, we're going to say exposure and the truth is key to this. So if you're not yet booked into the British Constitution Group conference on the 19th of November, please get your ticket because exposure, truth, bringing people together to reassert the rule of law is where we need to start. And of course, we need to know about our Constitution, and small advert here for the British Constitution Group website, which Mike has revamped. So looking very smart, and more information about the conference will go up in the next few days.
Okay, live programmes this evening. Ian Crane back with us tonight. Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30. He's got an interesting guest, we hope, we believe. Judith Very Baker, who, well, I'll just read what Ian said here, was once a promising science student who dreamed of finding a cure for cancer. However, she strayed from a path of mainstream scholarship at the University of Florida to a life of espionage in New Orleans with Lee Harvey Oswald. Judith will discuss how she came to be a cancer expert at such a young age and what led her to involvement in the development of a biological weapon. Lee Harvey Oswald was to smuggle into Cuba to eliminate Fidel Castro. Details on what she knew of Kennedy's impending assassination, her conversations with Oswald as late as 2 days before the killing, and her belief that Oswald was a deep cover intelligence agent who was framed for an assassination he was actually trying to prevent. So that's at 7:30 tonight, ukcolumn.org/live. And then at 9 o'clock, Fracking Nightmare as usual, covering all things fracking in the UK. So hope to see people watching that.
Indeed. Now, we are going to put up an advert for the Docherty family. I have to say we are delighted to be back in contact with Brian and Janice Docherty. They have been through an absolutely horrific time in Ireland. This is the family who've had 4 children taken away from them. Why? Because they simply reported the approach of a paedophile when they were living on an estate in Scotland. And as a result of that action alone, they have now been hounded by social services, the police, local authorities, the establishment in Scotland, in Ireland, and of course with the total support and collaboration of the British state. So this is the reality of Britain in 2016, that if you report paedophile activity that is too close to the political elite, your children taken away from you, your home burgled, broken into, smashed apart, animals, pets killed, dogs clearly tortured with cattle prods. And we learnt over the weekend that the 13-year-old daughter of Brian and Janice was actually tasered when the armed Garda took the children away from their parents. Now, at the moment, Brian and Janice are in desperate need of financial support. Money that was provided through the UK column some months ago has reached them and has made a difference. But there is an urgent need for some significant money to help this couple. And we're starting that plea today. If you can help in any way with a donation, however small, it is very, very necessary. We have some events around Brian and Janice which will come clear in the coming weeks. But at the moment, we can't talk about that. But we have to say that this immensely brave couple can only survive at the moment with help from the public and friends and family. So if you can donate, please consider making a donation through the UK column, but make sure all donations are clearly labelled for the Docherty family. 4 children taken away, mum and dad completely without blame. They haven't done anything. They have not harmed the children. They haven't neglected the children. They have simply reported their suspicions about a very large, it would appear, paedophile ring operating in the north of Scotland. In the north of Scotland, with connections through to the establishment and levels of British politics. This is outrageous. Please help if you can.
Okay. Also outrageous. NATO, 300,000 ground troops on high alert. This is right across the mainstream media. I've chosen The Independent here as just one example. But they're quoting Jens Stoltenberg. He says, we've seen a more assertive Russia implementing a substantial military build-up over many years. He said, we have seen Russia being much more active in many different ways. We have also seen Russia using propaganda in Europe among NATO allies, and that is exactly the reason why NATO is responding. We're responding with the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War. He said that there are a large number of people in the armed forces of NATO allies. We're looking into how more of them can be ready at shorter notice. So the rhetoric just continues to build. And, at what point does Putin say he's had enough?
Well, I think he's got to that point, Mike, which is why you're seeing the deployment of modern weapon systems by the Russians. They've had that huge civil protection drill of 40 million people in Russia a few weeks ago. So I think he's past it. And he's obviously going to be watching the forthcoming US elections, where we may have Hillary Clinton, who's charged with crimes in relation to security, all of the events in Benghazi, the death, the weapons trafficking, and also, I think, very credible reports of links between the Clintons and child abuse, paedophile rings. We could have that family running the USA. So no wonder that President Putin would be very nervous of deployments by America. Well, let's come to Russia Today, that had a rather tongue-in-cheek article. UK military threatened and amazed by Russia's revolutionary Armata tank. And the story was that a British Army intelligence officer had written a report, part of which was leaked. And in it, he said, as a complete package, Armata certainly deserves its billing as the most revolutionary tank in a generation. And then Russia Today put some statistics that they were going to be producing 218 of these tanks annually from 2018. They had 2,500 tanks in service, plus 12,500 in reserve. And they highlighted the fact that Britain has 227 Challenger tanks, which are now beginning to age. But we've labelled this treason in Westminster, and this is the reason. Because if we have a look at what's happening with Britain's steel industry, that is being absolutely destroyed. And if we're not going to use British steel to build warships, then of course we've got a nation which can't defend itself. If you can't produce steel and munitions, you can't defend the nation. So Michael Fallon, absolute traitor, along with his colleagues in Westminster, Britain being taken apart as a nation state and left defenceless. And although it's the mirror in both these reports, of course, it's two different projects. Here's the report that Trident submarines are the replacements to be built with French steel in what they describe as an ultimate betrayal of British workers. Well, of course, it's not. This is a betrayal of the country, and we're talking about treason as manufacturing is collapsed. Now, The Guardian a while ago was pointing out that the British government couldn't bail out Tata Steel, but they were happy to bail out the bank. So 124 billion into the corrupt international banking system, but the government couldn't find 1.5 billion to protect steel. They can find 1.9 billion to pump into GCHQ. So they asked a question, if we spend billions of pounds bailing out the banks, why can't the state bail out the steel industry? And the simple answer to that is because the steel needs to be destroyed, because this forces us into the EU military. We're dependent on the EU. And here's the BBC not helping things, pumping out the propaganda about steel. And this one here, of course, Talbot Steel Works closure could hit 15,000 jobs. So this report was back in March. And David Cameron, of course, friend of the European Union, he ruled out nationalisation. And why would he do this? Because, of course, British Steel had to be collapsed. Where does this take us? Well, if we start to put some of the pieces together, we can jump back to reporting that UK column has done before. And the connection here is twofold. It's common purpose and it's India. But this was the start of it. This is part of Tata Steel's local magazine, which went out in the Welsh communities. And they're basically saying that they're doing great work in the community. But in the background, we had Common Purpose, the political charity, actively working to help Tata expand a new plant in India. So we were seeing the migration of what was left of British steel production to India at the expense of British jobs. But more importantly, this is the strategic defence of Britain being undermined. Well, Tata Steel not clean, of course, and David Landsman, who was busy talking, Tata Steel Europe, in his speech, he was saying that he wanted to bring some unity and, quote, common purpose to this sprawling conglomerate. So in steps Stephen Kinnock. He travelled to India to beg. This is the state of the British nation. We have to go abroad to beg for other countries to keep their production in UK. Pretty disgusting. But we want to remind people that it was Julia Middleton, the chief executive of Common Purpose, who begged Stephen Kinnock's mum Glynis to help stop the exposure that CP Exposed website was doing of the Common Purpose activities. So there's the nice little merry-go-round of Tata Steel, Common Purpose helping to destroy British jobs, totally linked in with the Kinnock family, who are themselves pro-EU. So we'll fill the hole in. Common Purpose magic circle destroys lives and jobs in South Wales.
But it's quite all right, Brian, because Theresa is in India today. This is more British soft power. She's mainly talking about trade because we've exported all our manufacturing to India, among other places. So we've got to go and trade with them now. So this is her first visit to India since she took office in July. And she described the potential of British-Indian relationship as limitless. I will be discussing with Prime Minister Modi how we can increase the detail and depth of our trade and investment discussions and identify more of what we can do now to unleash our businesses, industries, exporters and investors. And of course, what is she doing there? She's pushing the common purpose, she's pushing the city-states agenda, and she's pushing migration. So if anybody thinks that even if Brexit were to happen, that the migration situation is going to change, well, in fact, it's going to be migration on steroids, because it's not just going to be free migration with the European Union. It's going to be free migration with every nation that we have a trade agreement with, because as Amitabh Kant told the technology summit when Theresa May was there, there's no such thing as selective free trade, so it's all or nothing. But just on the steel issue, of course, the Type 26 frigate was announced last week. That contract went to British Aerospace, BAE Systems, sorry. And the question then today is, where will the steel come from? Really what I want to say about this is just to highlight this article that has just gone up on the UK Column website today. International public procurement rules lay bare the lies of Brexit. This is more from Martin Edwards. Fantastic piece of research. He's highlighting a number of things. A UN resolution referenced within the United Nations Commission on Trade Law in January 2014. This is the core legal body of the United Nations system in the field of international trade law, and it provides lots of guidance on this and on enacting states will this is how enacting states will promulgate procurement regulations to fulfill the objectives and to implement the provisions of the model law. This is United Nations procurement law. Also, he's highlighting World Trade Organization agreements on government procurement. So GPA is the government procurement arrangements. Of course, what this means is that government procurement should not be prepared, adopted, or applied to foreign or domestic products and services and to foreign or domestic suppliers so as to afford protection to domestic products or services or domestic suppliers. So you may not procure any product or service under these rules, which would allow for sort of British steel to be used in the case of building the Type 26 frigate, for example. Then, of course, that filters down to the EU level. So at a regional level, the EU Commission has dictated that new rules have changed the way EU countries and public authorities spend a large part of the 1.9 trillion euro used for public procurement. So the EU claims that these new rules will, quote, prevent binational policies and promote the free movement of goods and services. So you want to know why we can't use steel produced in this country for our own warships? It's because we've signed all kinds of treaties and deals at an international United Nations and a European level, which mean that we can't. So that article describes that in detail, if anybody's interested.
Well, they should be interested because, of course, we're now on the final steps towards the complete destruction of Britain as a nation state, and that was the cross-party agenda, has been the cross-party agenda for a great many years, but we're now starting to see the pieces of the jigsaw. So dangerous times. We'll end with a plea for the Docherty family. Brian and Janice Docherty need your financial help, and they need it urgently if they are to survive the next few days. We've been able to assist them into some safe accommodation at the moment, but we don't have the reserves and the resources to keep that running. We need your help. And think about what this means. We've got Boris Johnson as a member of Theresa May's Conservative government, a government which says Parliament are sovereign. They say we can take your children away when we require. And Boris Johnson, of course, is responsible for a letter from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office which says that if you are abroad and an overseas state where you are takes your children, there's nothing the British government can do, there's nothing the Foreign and Commonwealth Office can do. You simply have to have a discussion with children's services of that state. So there we are. As far as Boris Johnson, Theresa May, the British government are concerned, they own your children. And if somebody steals your children overseas, don't think you're going to get any help from the British government. This is probably the most dangerous situation this country has been in since the Civil War. And on that note, we'll say very, very dangerous. Anybody at the moment who's encouraging violence on the streets, this is playing directly into the hands of the government. And I'm going to ask again, what is Nigel Farage up to? When will this man start to speak out about the reality of a criminal political elite who've established themselves in Westminster with the support, of course, of an international criminal banking cartel? We'll leave you to think about those items. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.